I think this is something we should all see, just because I think it is worth knowing in all seriousness that the president right now, in the midst of this crisis, is visibly struggling. There is something wrong, or he's just not doing okay. I don't know. But the president apparently just is not able to keep it together right now in his public appearances. And whether or not we were in a time of crisis, and we are, that seems like the sort of thing that we Americans should just all be aware of.
Said many times that the U.S. is doing far better than any other country when it comes to testing.
Yes.
Why does that matter? Why is this a global competition to you if everyday Americans are still losing their lives and we're still seeing more cases every day?
Well, they're losing their lives everywhere in the world. And maybe that's a question you should ask China. Don't ask me, ask China that question, okay? When you ask them that question, you may get a very unusual answer. Yes, behind you, please.
Sir, why are you saying that to me specifically?
I'm telling you, I'm not saying it specifically to anybody. I'm saying it to anybody that would ask a nasty question like that.
That's not a nasty question.
Please go ahead.
Why does it matter?
Okay, anybody else? Please, go ahead in the back, please.
I have two questions.
No, it's okay.
But you pointed to me. I have two questions, Mr. President.
Next, please.
But you called on me.
I did, and you didn't respond, and now I'm calling on the young lady in the back, please.
I just wanted to let my colleague finish, but can I ask you
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
What is wrong with the president today? We don't know. I mean, something's wrong. I mean, whether or not you like the president or not, whether you enjoy his public affect or not on a regular basis, it's clear that there's something wrong. And that's important whenever the president of the United States is visibly unwound like that. And it is possible that it is just stress. Publicly and politically, the White House and the president are pushing this line now that the epidemic is in the past, and the president has been even cheering on the protesters who are protesting stay-at-home orders and gathering in big groups and not wearing masks and saying everything should be open. But alongside that public position, inside his house, in the place where he now lives and works, there's an outbreak now. That has put all the senior leadership of the White House coronavirus task force into varying degrees of quarantine. It apparently put the vice president into isolation at home over the weekend, as reported by Bloomberg News, before the White House then belatedly denied that reporting. And then the vice president came back to the White House today, bravely wearing no mask. The president's personal valet, the vice president's communications director, I mean, people in the White House are testing positive now. And the White House, by and large, has not been having people work from home. The White House has regularly been having congregate meetings, including meetings involving the president and the vice president. The White House has not been engaging in much, if any, social distancing efforts in terms of the way people are working. Almost no one has been wearing masks inside the White House as a workplace. And so, maybe the president is just stressed out at the virus he has been playing down, this thing he's so invested politically in telling Americans that they shouldn't worry about contracting it anymore. It's inside his house now. CNN reporting that a person who spoke with the president this weekend said that President Trump, quote, voiced frustration that 2 White House staffers tested positive, and he has asked why his valets weren't ordered to wear masks before this week. The president has told people, reportedly, that he does not want to be near anyone who hasn't been tested and has bristled when coming into contact with some people at the White House. I mean, imagine being terrified and furious about the virus closing in on you in your home, while publicly, every day, you're railing about how great you've done at keeping everybody safe from this virus and how nobody should have to worry about getting it anymore and everything should open back up. So we'll all come back into contact with innumerable people who may or may not have it, who may or may not have been tested. I mean, there is a very divorced duality there, and it feels like the president is not handling this duality very well. His seams are very much showing. And, you know, we are over 1.3 million cases in the United States now. Over 80,000 Americans have died. Those astronomical numbers, which of course are relentlessly growing every day, they have just sort of slid off the president without even once appearing to perturb him. But he does appear perturbed now. He does appear unsettled. He did unceremoniously abort a White House news conference today in the middle of being unable to handle questions from female reporters. He just walked away and nobody knew what was going on.